Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling something pretty big, global trade, but not the usual boring econ stuff, I promise.
No.
Today we're talking about how trade can actually, lift people out of poverty, create a more inclusive and fair world, really make a difference.
Right on. And to help us navigate this complex topic, we've got the 2024 World Trade Report. It's full of insights into, how trade really impacts economies and communities all around the world.
All right, so let's dive in. This report talks about something called the Great Convergence. What's that all about?
Well, it refers to the fact that the gap between developing and developed economies, it's actually shrunk considerably over the past 30 years, like significantly.
Okay, so less of a divide between the haves and the have-nots.
Precisely. And what's really cool about this is, it's not just some abstract economic theory. We're talking about real changes in people's lives. Take South Korea, for example. Back in the 1950s, they were one of the poorest countries in the world, seriously. But look at them now. Their GDP per capita is comparable to the European Union. It's incredible.
That's a pretty amazing turnaround, so trade played a big part in that.
Absolutely. Opening up to global markets, it fuels growth, it creates jobs, and ultimately it improves living standards for millions. It's been a game changer for so many countries.
Okay, but the report also acknowledges that, it's not all sunshine and roses. Some countries are being left behind in this era of globalization. So what's going on there?
That's right. While many have thrived, others face some serious hurdles. High trade costs, for example, can make it really tough for them to compete on the global stage.
I see.
And some rely heavily on exporting commodities, things like coffee or minerals, which can be pretty volatile. One day prices are up, the next they're down. It makes it hard to plan for the future.
All right, it's like building your house on shaky ground.
Exactly. And to really get into the nitty-gritty of this, the report dives into some specific cases. For example, in Africa and the Middle East, it's actually more expensive to trade within their own regions than with other parts of the world. Crazy.
That's wild. It's like it's harder to do business next door than across the ocean.
It is, and that's a massive barrier to their economic development.
Oh.
So we're left with a crucial question. How do we make trade work for everyone? The report argues that simply opening up markets, well, it's not enough. We need policies that address these underlying challenges and create a more level playing field.
So we need to go beyond just traditional trade deals.
You got it. We need to invest in education and skills development, create social safety nets so people aren't left behind, improve infrastructure and support small and medium-sized businesses. These are the things that lay the foundation for inclusive growth.
Okay, so it's about empowering individuals and communities to fully participate in the global trading system. And the report talks about these inclusive trade policies. They even have something called the Inclusiveness RTA Index. Sounds pretty complicated.
Not really. It's actually pretty straightforward. RTA just stands for Regional Trade Agreements. And this index tracks how these agreements are starting to include provisions that directly help disadvantaged groups. It's a positive step.
So they're actually building inclusiveness into the rules of trade. And the index shows this as a growing trend. That's really encouraging.
It is. It suggests a growing awareness that trade needs to benefit everyone, not just a select few. And it's not just lip service. There are actual initiatives like the Aid for Trade program, which helps developing economies build up their trade capacity and infrastructure. So real action is being taken.
That's good to hear. But let's be real for a second. This is a complex issue. There are concerns about inequality, job displacement, the environmental impact of trade.
Absolutely. And the report doesn't shy away from those concerns at all. While trade can create both winners and losers, it emphasizes that going full-on protectionist isn't the answer. Actually, it can often hurt the most vulnerable. We need a more balanced approach. Right?
So how do we find that balance? How do we make sure trade benefits everyone?
Well, that's precisely what we'll be exploring in this deep dive. We'll be taking a closer look at specific countries' experiences, examining both their successes and the challenges they've faced to understand how trade can truly be a force for good in the world. Welcome back. So, we've talked about the big picture stuff, the great convergence, the challenges, the need for, inclusive policies. But let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah, let's zoom in on some actual countries and see how all of this plays out in the real world.
Okay, great. The report actually highlights a bunch of interesting cases. One that really jumps out is Costa Rica.
Costa Rica?
Yeah. They've really managed to use trade to, totally transform their economy in a positive way.
Interesting. I always think of them more for, beautiful beaches and rainforests, not necessarily trade. What's their secret?
Well, back in the 80s, they were super reliant on agricultural exports. Coffee, bananas, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the classic commodity trap. We talked about how unpredictable those prices can be.
Exactly. But then something really interesting happened. Intel, the tech giant, decided to set up a manufacturing plant there. Major turning point.
Wow, that's a huge investment. Why Costa Rica?
Well, they offered a stable political environment, a relatively skilled workforce, and a good location for accessing North American markets. But the coolest thing is it wasn't just about assembling computer chips. Intel brought with them advanced technology and know-how, which helped develop a more skilled workforce in Costa Rica.
Right, so it kind of raised the bar for everyone.
Exactly. It created this ripple effect across the whole economy. Other industries benefited from the improved infrastructure and the, bigger pool of skilled labor. And then Costa Rica started attracting other foreign investors, looking for a good place to do business.
That's amazing. It's like trade created this upward spiral of growth and development.
Yeah, totally. Costa Rica's experience really shows that attracting foreign direct investment, especially in high value sectors like tech, can totally change the game. But it also shows how important it is to have the right policies in place to make the most of it.
So what kind of policies helped Costa Rica succeed?
Well, they were really smart about investing in education and training to create that skilled workforce we talked about. They also focused on improving infrastructure to make trade easier, and they created a stable and predictable business environment so companies felt confident investing there.
Makes sense. You got to create the right conditions for success.
Absolutely. Okay, ready for another case study?
You mean?
Vietnam. They've also seen crazy economic growth through trade. But their journey is a little different. Highlight some other challenges and strategies.
Right, Vietnam. I think of them for agriculture and textiles mostly. But they've been getting into manufacturing too, right?
Oh yeah, big time. They've become a major manufacturing hub, attracting companies like Samsung and LG. What's interesting is that they've really focused on integrating into global value chains.
Hold on, break that down for me. What does integrating into global value chains actually mean?
Okay, imagine a product like a smartphone. It's not made in just one place, right? Different parts are made in different countries, and then they're all assembled somewhere else. Well, Vietnam has positioned itself as a key player in these really complex production networks.
Oh, I see. So they're specializing in certain parts of the process, becoming a vital link in the global supply chain.
Exactly. And that's allowed them to boost exports like crazy and attract tons of foreign investment. But it comes with its own set of challenges.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Being part of a global value chain means you're really dependent on things running smoothly across borders. Any disruptions, like what happened during the pandemic, can have a huge impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. So resilience and flexibility are super important in that model.
Absolutely. Vietnam's been working on diversifying its export markets and moving up the value chain, so they're producing more sophisticated components and finished goods. It makes them less vulnerable to those external shocks.
Smart. So Costa Rica and Vietnam, two very different paths to trade-driven growth. One focused on attracting foreign investment, the other on becoming a key part of these global value chains.
Right. And their stories show that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to trade. You have to tailor your strategies to your specific situation and think long-term. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
You got to play to your strengths, for sure.
You got it. Now, the report also looks at some examples where trade hasn't been so successful. It's important to learn from those too, right?
Totally. We need to understand where things went wrong so we can do better.
Right. One case that raises some tough questions is Angola. They have huge oil reserves.
Oh, yeah, oil. You'd think they'd be rolling in it.
You would, right. But Angola's experience actually shows that just having natural resources isn't enough. They've been struggling with what's called the resource curse.
The resource curse. I've heard that term, but I'm not sure I totally get it. What does that mean?
It's this weird thing where countries that are rich in natural resources, like oil or minerals, often end up with slower economic growth and more poverty than countries without those resources. It's kind of a paradox.
That doesn't make sense. How could having valuable stuff be a curse?
Well, there are a few reasons. First, commodity prices can be super unpredictable, makes it tough to plan for the future. Second, resource-rich countries sometimes become too reliant on just that one export, and they neglect other parts of the economy.
So they put all their eggs in one basket, and then if something happens to that basket.
Exactly. And third, sometimes all that money from resource extraction can lead to corruption and bad governance.
Makes sense. Like a magnet for shady dealings.
Right. And in Angola's case, even though they have all that oil wealth, they haven't really been able to use it to create widespread economic development. They still have a lot of poverty and inequality.
So Angola's story is kind of a warning, right? Having valuable stuff doesn't guarantee success. You need good institutions, smart leadership, and a diverse economy to really benefit from trade.
Exactly. It's not enough to just focus on the trade itself. You got to look at the bigger picture, the economic and political context. Super important.
Okay, so we've seen some wins with Costa Rica and Vietnam, and a cautionary tale with Angola. What other lessons can we take away from these stories? So we've been all over the map, looking at how countries have used trade to shape their futures. Some success stories, some cautionary tales. It's clear there's no magic formula.
Definitely not. Each country's got its own unique path, but one thing that seems pretty consistent is the importance of getting the basics right, those fundamentals.
Okay, so let's talk about those fundamentals. What separates the countries that are really thriving from those that are struggling?
Well, it's kind of a mix of things. Investing in education and skills development is huge. Got to have a workforce that can adapt to, the demands of a globalized economy. Infrastructure is also key, like good ports, reliable transportation networks, access to technology, all that stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got to be able to move goods efficiently and connect to those global markets.
Exactly. And maybe most important, you need a stable and predictable business environment. That means clear regulations, a fair legal system, and a government that's serious about fighting corruption.
So it's not just about the economics, it's about having good governance too. A solid foundation lets countries really make the most of trade while minimizing the risks.
Right on. And, it's not just developing countries that need to focus on these fundamentals. Developed economies have to keep adapting too, investing in their people and infrastructure if they want to stay competitive in this, rapidly changing world.
Good point. Globalization's a two-way street. Everyone's got to be proactive. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've talked about the great convergence, the challenges some countries face, the whole idea of inclusive trade policies, and we've looked at some real-world examples of how trade is played out in different places.
Yeah, we've seen how trade can be this powerful engine for growth,
Right.
lifting millions out of poverty, but we've also been real about the fact that it's not perfect. It can create winners and losers, and it needs to be managed carefully so everyone benefits.
So where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember is that trade is about people. It's about connecting people and communities across borders, creating opportunities, and making lives better.
Love that. It's easy to get lost in the, abstract economic theories, but we should never forget the human side of trade.
Absolutely. And the second takeaway is that we need to move beyond these simple free trade versus protectionism arguments. The real world is way more complicated than that. We need a more nuanced approach that recognizes both the potential benefits and the downsides of trade and finds that balance.
So it's about making trade work for everyone, not just a lucky few.
Exactly. And that takes smart policies collaboration between governments, businesses, and civil society, and a real commitment to making trade more inclusive and sustainable.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about how trade really works and its potential to make the world a better place.
Glad to hear it. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. There's always more to learn about this fascinating world of global trade.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. We encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a trading system that works for all of us.